New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos. You can now download a free PDF copy or purchase a beautiful printed edition of Issue 5 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore human consciousness as it pertains to the assimilation of food. With me is Deborah Kesten, an internationally known nutritional researcher and public health expert and author of Feeding the Body, Nourishing the Soul. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you.
You began your career working with Dr. Dean Ornish.
You're thinking of my husband, yes.
Right. Dr. Dean Ornish, who I interviewed recently, working on the nutritional aspects of heart disease.
Correct.
And then from there you moved more into the spiritual aspects of nutrition.
How did that happen? I worked with Dr. Ornish when I was in graduate school, and Dr. Ornish's program, as you probably know, includes 4 tiers, and that is one, group support and exercise and stress management, specifically yoga and meditation, and also a no-fat added plant-based diet. And over the years, I've done lots and lots of counseling, and I also have parents who have had heart disease, and I write also. I'm a health journalist. And with all this incredible knowledge that we have about health and nutrition and heart disease and cancer and arthritis and lots of other health ailments, many of our health problems continue to get worse. 55% of Americans are overweight. A third of us are clinically obese. Diabetes is on the increase along with obesity. And different kinds of cancer also getting worse, now more prevalent. And over the years, as I've counseled people, my own parents had difficulty, although they understood cognitively what I would tell them and suggest, had difficulty making dietary changes and lifestyle changes. And I've counseled scores of people, often women whose husbands are ill and women who are grappling with weight issues. And no matter how I phrase things, although people cognitively, intellectually understand what I'm saying, long-term adherence, compliance, lifestyle change is very, very difficult, especially with diet. I think 98% of people who lose weight keep it off. So over the years, I've always had this sense that whatever we're doing, as incredible and helpful as it is in terms of nutritional information, just is not adequate enough. It's imbalanced and incomplete.
Well, when I interviewed Dr. Ornish, he made the point, based on his recent book, that the single most important factor that he was able to uncover with regard to human health across the board really had to do with intimacy and relationships.
I think that's a big part of it. And if you look back again, I snooped around and did lots of reading and research about our evolutionary ancestors. And on an evolutionary level, for thousands of years, as we human beings, Homo sapiens, have been around, and prior to that, our non-human or ancestors and cousins, we have a heritage, a cultural heritage of being within tribes, being with other people, dining with other people, socializing with other people, eating a particular way. So, and moving, we call it exercise now, but of course moving our body was part of our evolutionary heritage. So the lifestyle on one level in which Dr. Ornish has been focusing really is how we instinctively evolved as human beings, and I think social support is a big part of that as it relates to diet and our whole life.
And eating is a very interesting social custom to me because it combines both our animal nature and our spiritual nature.
Absolutely. I think for most people, eating has always been a social and a ceremonial and sensual pleasure and delight. But contrast that to how most Americans in particular are eating. Most of us are eating while it's called task stacking, while we're in front of the television, while we're at our computers, while we're in our cars alone, while we're walking down the street, while we're watching TV. And most of us are dining alone, which is the total antithesis of how we evolved as human beings. So I particularly relate this kind of isolated eating to people with eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, but also the American Psychiatric Association now diagnoses binge eating disorder, which is overeating, out of control eating 2 or more times a week for 6 months or more. But we also have now, it's in the literature now in health journals and especially in the lay literature, most Americans especially have subclinical eating disorders, SEDs, which are those of us, most of us, who are counting calories obsessively and weight watching obsessively and are fat phobic obsessively, fear fat in terms of what's on our plate and our own body fat, and people who are judgmental and hateful of others who eat a certain way, or if we follow a diet and we go off the diet, all this judgment and moral issues around food, and that's unique to America.
Well, what you have done is looked at the wisdom traditions of humanity, and all the way across the board, from Native Americans to the Hindus and Buddhists and Muslims and Jewish and Christian traditions, and they each seem to have something very important to say about the spirit with which we eat our food.
Absolutely. to give you a better perspective on that and why I did that is, again, I felt there was an imbalance in our current relationship to food, and I focused on how we got here and identified 5 cultural forces which kind of converged about a century ago, and here we are on the eve of the new millennium. And about 100 years ago, I identified 5 forces, as I call it, and one was that science replaced religion, and we also, which began in the 1600s and 1700s, and nutritional science really evolved in the 1840s when a German scientist named Justus von Liebig, he discovered and isolated, here we have that word isolating, which never happened before in regards to food. He isolated carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and minerals, and nobody knew what to do with this until the Industrial Revolution hit. And we started isolating food and separating food. What we now call refined and processed food used to be called separated food. And people in China and Japan who went from brown rice to white rice, and people in England and America especially who went to mostly whole grains to white flour products, including pasta, all of a sudden diseases of malnourishment started surfacing, beriberi and pellagra, and the powers that be, food industry and nutritional science, emerged and merged together because we started enriching food, adding back the vitamins and minerals we knew about at the time, 70 or 80, 90 years ago. And we also had Victorian values. We were a Puritan-based, America is founded on Puritan ethics. So every time I hear people whom I counsel and work with tell me about, oh, I was good today, I was bad today, I was sinful, that's legal, that's illegal. These are moral judgments onto food that never existed prior to about 100 or 150 years ago. So what I wound up doing is I went on, I call it my nutrition journey around the world. Most of us, when we think of travel, we think of food and travel. I went on a nutrition journey around the world from my computer and library to find out not just what we ate for thousands of years, but how we ate, the consciousness we brought to food, and what our spiritual ancestors have to tell us about how we ate before what I call eating by number, before all the calorie counting and weight watching and fat gram counting.
Well, I myself was raised in the Jewish tradition, and I know there are many dietary laws, and I have to say, when I grew up, that's really how they were presented. These are the laws, and some people said, well, yes, it's healthier that way, and other people would say, well, it doesn't matter, it has to do with this is what God wants you to do, who cares whether it's healthy or not? But they're really, as I was raised in the Midwest, in a sort of conservative Jewish congregation at the time, there wasn't any strong sense about the consciousness of eating. It was just sort of, here's some laws.
I think it's something we've lost over the millennia, over the centuries. What I think is happening now compared to where we were for thousands of years in our evolution is I think where we are today is most of what we get is what I call dietary dogma. All these shoulds and rules and regulations. So my intention was not just to explore what our spiritual ancestors and these wisdom traditions and cultural traditions have to tell us about how to eat, but my intention was to dig behind the initial spiritual intention behind the food-related beliefs and rituals that evolved over the centuries, including, of course, Judaism.
Well, one of the things you focus on, which I really do appreciate and found quite fascinating, is the notion of a blessing that is said before eating.
Well, in the Jewish tradition, for example, most of us think that the Jewish dietary laws, the kosher dietary laws, are antiquated, outdated. Gee, nobody gets trichinosis anymore. Why can't you have pork? But again, when I started digging this up, the rabbi whom I interviewed, Rabbi Harold Schulweis in Southern California, he commented that while all flesh is not forbidden in Judaism, what is forbidden is particular animal foods. And the animal foods that are forbidden is based on, I quote, the refined consciousness of the animal. And I thought, what do you mean by that? And he said the animals that are forbidden are animals that take the lives of other animals to survive. So for example, an eagle would never be included in the Jewish dietary scheme. And shellfish are forbidden. And shellfish live on the bottom of the ocean and eat waste, consume waste and bones of other animals, of other fish. And my husband, who grew up on a farm, he told me that if a pig is protein deprived, the pig will eat its own young. So the concept in Judaism, I believe, and Leon Kass has written a wonderful book about this, he believes that it is the place of the animal in the universal whole that is really behind the Jewish dietary laws, what they're eating, the consciousness of the animal, and how they are living in this world. So the concept of refined consciousness is quite extraordinary. And what evolved also with the Jewish dietary laws is when they came into creation, we believe during the Noahic period, that we don't know why Jewish people went into eating animal food. We really can't find that out. But this was relatively 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, barbaric time, obviously no refrigeration. People were pulling limbs off of animals. And God told Noah, if you must take the life of an animal, you must do so by causing as little harm and fear to the animal as possible. And while some people today would call that an oxymoron, to kill an animal and not cause fear, it's really coming from a place of profound compassion. There's the consciousness again from the heart. And the kosher dietary laws are based on slaughtering the animal again in a particular way to cause as little harm to the animal. So there's really quite a profound, heartfelt consciousness behind this.
It reminds me of stories I have heard of American Indians where when they're about to hunt, they pray to the spirit of the animal and thank it for giving its life for their survival.
Absolutely. It's all religions and traditions to varying degrees prior to our eating by number mentality, which has become so normal to all of us. All religions and traditions basically have a value system of relating to food. I define it as spiritual nutrition, relating to food, plant food, and food animals as containing the mystery of life as we human beings do. And because they're equals in that regard, they are regarded as a gift from the divine, a gift from a Muslim, I call it a gift from Allah. It is a gift to live because we literally become one with food and it with us. The alchemical mystery of life is inherent in food, and plant-based food contains the mystery of life. Food animals contain the mystery of life, and we human beings obviously do. And the people with whom we share food do. So I perceive what I now call spiritual nutrition as the interrelationship among living entities. Food is not simply a number and something to be analyzed for bodily health, but it is also something that profoundly impacts our emotional well-being, our spiritual well-being, and also our social well-being, way beyond the merely physical, which is what we've kind of only focused on.
I suppose the Christian communion is sort of the ultimate act of ingestion that recalls the mystery of life.
Absolutely. In Christianity, you have the congregation approaching what used to be called the open table, and through that loving awareness, because hopefully when they're approaching the priest to take the bread and the wine of the Eucharist, they are bringing a loving consciousness to the bread and wine, and through that, food being a medium, communing with Jesus, with the divine. And they're doing it, again, here's the social element, they're doing it in communion with other people. and taking that message, that loving message out into the world. What started this journey for me, the click I got, started when I was presenting at the first International Conference on Lifestyle and Health in New Delhi, India.
Yes.
And one of the presenters was Dr. K.L. Chopra, who is the father and mentor of Deepak Chopra. And Dr. Chopra is a cardiologist, and he's a devout Hindu. And I'm a health journalist also. I do a lot of writing for magazines about health and nutrition and prevention. And I was interviewing Dr. Chopra in this incredibly enormous, cavernous auditorium. And he started to tell me about prana, which is the Sanskrit word for the vital life force in the universe. A Chinese person may call that chi energy, and we just simply call it energy. And he told me that devout Hindus, usually wives are preparing food, they must prepare the food with love, because Hindus believe that energy, that loving consciousness is infused into the food. And in turn, that subtle energy is metabolized when we eat the food. And when I left the interview, I thought, here is a clinically trained physician, a cardiologist, talking in essence about infusing food with love. And he is talking about Hinduism, a 3,500-year-old religion. And what started my journey was this conversation, because I thought, if Hinduism espouses, in essence, cooking with love and preparing food with love, surely other world religions and traditions have discovered this too and espouses it too. Have we lost it? And that's what started my nutrition journey.
And I suppose in some contexts it's not only the cooking and preparation of the food, but even the growing of it.
Absolutely. It is again, I talk about the concept of living entities, whatever that mystery of life is, the sun, the light from the energy from the sun, and the water, and also wind and air. All the elements we human beings need is what food animal needs and is what plants need. So there's this huge interconnection, this interrelationship among we human beings and the food that we eat.
Now, in the Buddhist tradition, there's the concept of mindfulness is applied to eating.
I define that now, and this, again, is most prevalent in Buddhism, but you can weave this through on many, many different levels, because I distilled this and this surfaced in different world religions and cultural traditions. Buddhism espouses bringing a moment-to-moment, non-judgmental mindfulness, awareness to each aspect of the meal, indeed to each aspect of life. And in terms of food, that would mean from the concept of preparing the food to the actual eating of the food and the digestion of the food and the cleanup afterward. And in Buddhism, what is particularly fascinating, I think, is the cook is second, the head cook in Buddhism is second only to the abbot in importance and significance within the Buddhist tradition. And I believe that that is one path to enlightenment, because the mystery of life is in food, and I believe that when we focus on food mindfully, that we get that interrelationship and that potential sense of enlightenment, that spiritual connectedness.
Then you refer to the Japanese tea ceremony, which is
so
it sort of builds on that Buddhist notion.
Well, Japanese, we call it the Japanese tea ceremony. The initial phrase is the Japanese way of tea, and the way comes from Taoism. The roots come from Taoism and also Zen Buddhism, which was eventually brought over to Japan and adapted by Zen Buddhists. And what is fascinating about the Japanese way of tea, it's a way again of bringing all the elements. Here you have the elements again indoors, and here you have the social element of bringing people indoors in this tea house and giving regard to the people with whom you're sharing tea. And you're doing this in a serene, conscious, mindful, aesthetically beautiful, nature-connected way. And through that path, you are enjoying that tea again, which contains again that mystery of life.
And there is a sense of appreciating all of the subtleties of the experience.
All the subtleties, the moment-to-moment. One of the pleasures of it in the Buddhist tradition would be, again, to bring in the tonal qualities of the water pouring. There is a concept called tea mind to approach life. I understand that that's even prevalent throughout China, that people have tea mind or they don't have tea mind. Either you have that sense of aesthetics and awareness and connection and unity and regard for others, and an appreciation of nature and the whole way of tea, or you don't, and you're not living in a present moment. You're in your mind rather than your heart.
I also found it fascinating that you focus both on fasting and feasting as ways in which we can regard food.
I was particularly interested in that because of our eating disorder problems, which is growing in America. I mentioned that previously when we started talking, that approximately I hear 9 million, 10 million, 11 million people have eating disorders in this country, 10% of whom are males. And again, I am defining eating disorders, though, also as the majority of Americans who are obsessed about food in varying ways and judgmental around it, and are obsessed about calories and fat phobic, and are very judgmental about people who eat, dairy, judgmental and angry. If you eat dairy products, or you're a vegetarian or you're not a vegetarian, or you're gluttonous, all this stuff is going on, beating ourselves up and beating others up around food. So I researched fasting from a spiritual perspective, because all world religions have a tradition of fasting. And anorexia is abstaining from food to the point often of starvation. And I define that as a spiritual emptiness in the soul, a lack of love and connection and union with the divine creator, God, whatever you call that supreme being that makes life life. And the opposite of that is spiritual fasting. And spiritual fasting, again, as with our relationship to food and eating, is about union with the divine through food, a spiritual connection to something larger than ourselves. And what was fascinating is I interviewed a Native American about the Native American Vision Quest fast, because I wanted to understand what fasting on a spiritual level was rather than a non-spiritual level of anorexia, which is an emptiness in the soul. And I interviewed Katie Martin, who's a Native American Indian and has about 4 different tribal backgrounds in her blood and her heritage. And while I was interviewing her, she told me about a Vision Quest fast she went on when she married her husband, who was a shaman, and she wanted to learn what her role with him should be. So she went into the wilderness, and a friend of hers brought her water, and all she had was water when she had to have it, and he would check on her to make sure she would be fine. The second day of the fast, she told me, an eagle stayed with her. And the eagle, again, was perceived in the Native American tradition as a guardian spirit to watch over her and help to give her her message, her answer to her message that she was seeking. Well, when she finally understood what she was supposed to be doing with her husband and share her role with him, the moment she kind of became grounded again, and now she wasn't in a spiritual place but was kind of bored, it was time to go home. The moment she broke that consciousness, the eagle flew away. Now, what caused me to gasp is my husband, Larry Sherwitz, has been Dr. Ornish's director of research for about 18 years and worked with him on and off for 18 years. And Larry is very involved in yoga and meditation and goes on his own spiritual Vision Quest fast every few years. Well, on his last Vision Quest fast in the Wiminuche Wilderness in Colorado, a white mountain goat, whom Larry nicknamed Freddie, stayed with him for 3 days, as Katie Martin's eagle had stayed with her. And Larry first found Freddie the goat in the morning when he unzipped the tent. And Freddie was standing in Larry's prayer circle, and they just kind of stared at each other. And what was fascinating is the moment Larry broke his fast, he was feeling weak and he needed to hike down, Freddie left. Freddie the goat, the white mountain goat who stayed with him, disappeared. And this white mountain goat in Hindu tradition represents, because it's so high up in the mountains, represents higher consciousness. And so Freddie disappeared, and this goat was with Larry through thunderstorms and lightning storms, morning and night, for 3 days, until Larry, as with Katie Martin, broke his fast.
It's interesting because we earlier referred to the eagle as being an unkosher product in the Jewish tradition and of lower consciousness, a meat-eating animal.
As an animal to consume, different consciousness. I am truly trying to, from my research, not use judgmental words because
Right.
we're so inundated with dietary dogma and shoulds and shouldn'ts and diet, diet, diet. I believe food is something, again, that nourishes our soul and nourishes our consciousness and our emotions. And we now have research verifying this. So I believe food has literally been something that nourishes body, keeps us alive, emotional, spiritual, and social well-being over the centuries. It has never been something to judge ourselves or others with.
Well, Deborah Kesten, I think we're getting to the spirit of eating here rather than the letter of the law, whether it comes from a religion or from a scientific program. Thanks so much for being with me.
My pleasure.
It's been a pleasure for me. And thank you for being with us. And be sure to check your channel guide for part 2 of our 2-part series on consciousness and the assimilation of food.
Book 2 in the New Thinking Aloud Dialogues book series is a tribute to parapsychologist Russell Targ, celebrating his 90th birthday. New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos.